council meeting here with the housing executive. You've all got the agenda hopefully in front of you, but I'd like to extend a special welcome to Paul Isherwood, who's the Director of Asset Management, Mr. Jonathan Blease, who's the Regional Manager South, Ms. Una McAvinny, who's the Area Manager for the Southwest, and Ms. Mona Conway, which is the Place Shaping South. So thanks very much for coming to see us. I suppose if we go through the agenda just one by one, the first item I have on the agenda is apologies, and I'm going to take it through group leaders first. Let's bring in participants. So we'll take it through group leaders first. Have we any apologies from Sinn Féin? Is Barry in, or maybe somebody would speak on Barry's behalf? Don't see Barry in the meetings. No. No. Okay, well maybe we circle back to the Sinn Féin grouping. From the Ulster Unionists.
Thank you, Chair. Sorry, the only apology I'm aware of, and I'm just after literally getting it, is Councillor Diana Armstrong. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. From Democratic Unionists.
Thank you, Chairman. Just Councillor Mark Buchanan. Thank you.
Okay. From the SDLP.
Thank you, Chair. Apologies from Councillor Gannon, McPhillips and Blake. Thank you.
And from any of the independent or single member parties, any you're aware of? I haven't been made aware of any beforehand. No. Okay. Councillor Michael Duff, do you have any apologies on behalf of the Sinn Féin group?
I am Councillor Siobhan Curry, Councillor Anne-Marie Fitzgerald, I think isn't in the meeting. I think she's working in her different role, and also Councillor Catherine Kelly.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks a million. So I think that's all the apologies dealt with. Item number 2, any declarations of interest? Feel free to indicate if you have. Okay, no declarations of interest. Just I know there's a couple of microphones still on. If you could keep those off to avoid feedback. So we go to item number 3, to receive a presentation from the Northern Ireland Housing Executive regarding the Housing Investment Plan 2019-2023 update for the FODC Council area, and that reports are attached. So I'm assuming that someone from the Northern Ireland Housing Executive wish to jump in at this stage.
Hello, Chair. It's Paul Isherwood. I'm the Director of Asset Management. Can you all hear me?
It might be nice if you just turn your microphone or your visuals on. Just
yeah.
Some people find it easier to understand.
No problems.
Oh, okay.
Okay, Chair. Just like to thank you and the members for allowing us to do this presentation. I'm just going to share my screen so you can all see the actual presentation itself. If you can tell me if that's come up.
Yep, that's come up.
Yeah.
Okay. Again, thank you all for allowing us to come and attend this, and we're happy to take questions at the end. This is just a short presentation on the Housing Investment Plan, and just to tell you where we are and what we're doing. So as you are aware, the HIP itself is a statutory requirement which we are obliged to undertake and to present the proposals to the Council. We do engage with a range of stakeholders to examine key housing issues across the district. The Housing Executive is a community planning partner, and the HIP is a key document which contributes to the evidence base, and we've aligned our outcomes to those of the community plan for Fermanagh and Omagh Community Plan 2030. So basically, from last year, there was a number of issues raised around unmet housing need and the lack of new build, identification and delivery of rural housing, homelessness, housing standards, insulation and contract works. And some of this we've actually responded to in respect of our commissioning perspective to housing associations and with the engagement with housing associations on site identification. There's been the rural housing needs tests, and again, site identification studies has been carried out. There's the homelessness strategy, there's the asset management strategy, and there is now the new draft cavity wall insulation action plan. So in the housing investment plan itself then, this year, as you can all appreciate, it's been unprecedented for everybody. The Housing Executive has followed government advice on the management of the coronavirus outbreak, and we have made changes in the way we deliver services, and yourself and your members will have seen that. These changes are intended to protect our staff and customers while ensuring that we continue to provide key essential services. As ever, we have a good working relationship with Fermanagh and Omagh District Council, and there's been a lot of engagement on the priorities. As the Strategic Housing Authority for Northern Ireland, we prepared this housing investment plan to inform the Community Planning Partnership on the state of the housing market, on housing needs, the policy priorities, and the public sector investments. Whilst we're still unsure what our programme will look like covering the coming year, we'll continue to make plans for when we can commence all the work. And you will all received a COVID booklet on what we've been doing in respect of the works that's been undertaken during this pandemic. Okay then, so on the housing executive investment then, 16.54 million been invested in the last 12 months. Again, broken down into planned maintenance of 2.04, 2.7 on new build, just over 2 million on response maintenance, 4.81 million on supporting people, 2.33 million on private sector, 1.24 million on affordable warmth, 0.83 million on adaptations, $500,000 on grounds maintenance, and 0.3 million on community development. Normally, when we're doing this presentation, we would give you the figures for the projected works this year. But however, with the delays in the pandemic, we are just finalising the programme of works to year end. And as soon as that is available, we will forward that to the council for consideration by the members. Population change then, key issues that will influence on the impact of the housing market. The population of Fermanagh and Omagh is projected to increase by 2.4% to just over 119,000 in 2028, and that's accounting for a 6.1% increase overall in the Northern Ireland population. The population changes between 2018 and 28 will be concentrated mainly in the 65 plus age groups, which is projected to increase by 30% over the 10-year period. Population growth for children, and that's 0 to 15 years, is projected to decrease by 6.5%, with growth in the working age population projected to decrease by 2.1%. Household size is projected to reduce from 2.66 to 2.57, with a number of households projected to increase by 2,497 to just over 45,000 in 10 years to 2028. Developing homes that are suitable size and taking into account of the needs of an ageing population are key considerations in the delivery of new homes. So 10-year breakdown then, 49,100 homes. Basically, that's broken down into 63% are owner-occupied, 27% are rented, and 10% social housing rented. Waiting list trends. The waiting list for Fermanagh and Omagh at the 31st of March showed 1,676 waiting list applicants who required a home, 1,153 of whom were deemed to be in housing stress, and these charts and details are within the booklets. There have been 282 allocations in the preceding 12 months up to that period, and that's up from the previous year of 264, again within the booklet. The Housing Executive has identified a requirement for 334 new homes across the district over the period of 19 to 24. And the housing need is concentrated in Enniskillen Town with a need of 176 units and Omagh of 113 units itself. Okay, the household breakdown. The waiting list for Fermanagh and Omagh, again, was showing at 1,676. Single person household groups make up 50% in housing stress, followed by older persons households making up 19% and small families making up 17% of the total. The increase in requirement of smaller households is key consideration in identifying and developing new build going forward. Reasons for homelessness. The number of households presented as homelessness in the district have fallen by 3 between March 19 and March 20. 669 presenters by the end of March, and the reference is Appendix 5 on page 58. The main reasons cited for homeless acceptances continue to be as a result of accommodation not being reasonable and sharing breakdown in family disputes. During 1920, the Housing Executive made 40 placements into voluntary sector hostels and 83 placements into single lets. New build SHDP, 25 new social homes were completed, 9 new social homes on site. 334 new social housing units are needed over the next 5 years. 12 gross new social housing units have been programmed, an unmet need identified in the commissioning prospectus published within the SHDP. And again, this is to direct housing associations in their site search. And we'll continue to work with housing associations to develop housing within the area. So the next steps then, this is the progress against the HIP outcomes, and these will be regularly monitored and be reported on an annual basis. The Housing Executive colleagues will continue to work with the Council and partners to identify opportunities to collaborate to meet outcomes of the community planning for Manor and Omagh by 2030. Our Fermanagh and Omagh team continues to provide a high quality dedicated housing service to the area, which has been even more difficult during the lockdown period, and we thank the members for their help and assistance in this time. My thanks are extended to the councillors and the officers of the Fermanagh and Omagh District Council for their support for the Housing Executive. We look forward to continuing the work with them on matters of mutual interest over the coming year. Thank you, Chair, and that was the brief overview of the presentation. If there is any questions.
Thanks very much. The first indication I have for a question is from Councillor Coffey.
Thank you, Chair. I didn't expect to come in so early. Okay, well, I thank you for the presentation, and I read your report with some interest earlier on. I have to say it's a very concerning report, frankly, from the perspective of a representative of working class people in Enniskillen in particular, but also as a representative of working class people across this county. There is quite clearly a failure to deliver the housing that is needed, needed in this area. In particular, there's clear evidence in the report of a significant crisis, and that's even before the impact of the COVID pandemic, which is going to result in considerable uptick, I believe, in repossessions and evictions and all that, because people can't afford rent. I note page 21 that there's the trend of repossessions exhibits a marked increase over the last few years. I note on page 26 the doubling almost of housing stress. And I note on that, as you've noted in yourself in your presentation, 334 units more of housing, social housing, are required in our district in the next 5 years. The reality is there was 25 provided in 2019-2020 year, which is far below what is needed to meet the extant housing need. So it's quite clearly a case that Stormont is allowing a crisis in social housing in our area because of underfunding. 2/3, page 29, 2/3 of the housing waiting list, 2/3 of the housing stress is in urban areas, that's Enniskillen and Omagh, but less than 1/2 of provision or allocation is within those areas. So there's a clear disproportion in the ability of the Housing Executive to meet the chronic need that exists. More than half the total housing need is in Enniskillen alone as one settlement. More than half of the total housing need in our district is in not the biggest town in our district, in the second biggest town in our district. And it's almost 50% higher than Omagh, which is considerably bigger than anywhere else. So this is very much an issue for the big two towns, in particular in Enniskillen. I also note page 57, no new social housing was provided in Enniskillen in 2019 to 2020. There's none on site for the coming year, and there are 2 units to come in the following 4 years, according to your calculation, with 4 which is again a very low on delivery in terms of a failure to deliver the numbers that's needed by vulnerable women. 4 units for vulnerable women in Fermanagh, which is really scandalous, frankly. I also note that the number of households in temporary accommodation has risen from 98 to 260 in the last 4 years alone, which is again a scandalous situation. And finally, I just want to, all that's probably just a commentary, and I don't necessarily blame the housing executive. It's the situation you've been placed in due to underfunding. I recognise that. But is there any plans to address the extant clear need that exists in Enniskillen? We have heard of some projects, but are they actually proceeding? And secondly, a question around the void houses. I know 10 void units, it's not going to make the difference between what's needed and what's there. But 10 houses could mean a difference to some households in chronic need. 10 void houses, what can be done about that? I do notice you have a target there, but it seems to me even that we should grasp at every possible option to address the housing need that exists. Thank you, Chair.
Okay.
Okay, I think that this will be shared by 3 people. So Mona can pick up the issue over the development. Una, if you want to pick up on the void, and then Johnny, if you want to pick up on the other issues the member raised.
Sure. Yeah.
Okay, so do you want to start, Mona?
Yes, hopefully you can hear me okay. Thank you very much, Councillor, for your commentary and your question. If I could just give a very brief summary on the level of housing need projection in the local towns, and really plans that have been put in place really to help to address the need. For Enniskillen town itself, the 5-year projection is 176. We are noticing that the projected housing need trends are on the increase, and even we're looking at current figures at the minute, and we are noticing an increase. You may recall back across back to about 2016, there had been letting difficulties within Enniskillen town and Omagh, and our local office had trouble actually even allocating properties and had to go to multiple offers, and this actually stemmed throughout the rural areas as well. It's good to see that the waiting list is a lot firmer now, and we are getting good, strong projected trends, and it allows us to act upon them. For Enniskillen town, the main level of unmet housing need would really be for singles and for older people. And if we look at singles, older people and family households, that would comprise about 88% of the waiting list. So it's more small unit accommodation that is needed. Currently, there's discussions ongoing with DFC regarding lands at Grosvenor Barracks, with a view to a portion of the site being used to address social housing need, and we anticipate 2 phases of 30 units in each phase for that. But we really do need sites close to the town centre to help to address the needs for singles and older people. Currently, housing associations are actively having a look. Within our commissioning prospectus, we're highlighting Enniskillen town as a particular need for this type of accommodation. And also to assist housing association in helping to identify sites, we're going to carry out a site investigation study, which is going to look at any piece of land within the development limit of the town to help address this. Within Omagh town, the projected housing need is 113, as you say, Councillor. It's lower than the level for Enniskillen, but in saying that, that's an increase of 47 on the previous year. Housing associations have been more successful in Omagh more recently. Apex Housing Association completed a scheme at Woodside Avenue for 14 units. And Triangle Housing Association are acquiring off-the-shelf properties that's already built at Pinefields. They completed 8 homes and are on site with a further 9. Apex Housing Association have lands at Ballinamullen Road, and they're planning a 5-unit scheme there. Another housing association that's at an early stage has made a bid to develop 40 units at the former Technical College site. And Radius Housing Association are looking at off-the-shelf properties as well within Omagh. The housing executive have limited land bank within the 2 towns, but we have land bank at Circular Road, which is currently being considered for development. Also, we continue to monitor public sector sites within the town as well. So that's really picked up the level of housing need and what's happening in the main towns. Maybe Una, you want to pick up next?
We have what are called operational voids, which are voids that are ongoing, that where a tenant terminates and then there's repairs required, but they're not void long term, they're just void to have repairs carried out, and they're usually allocated before the repairs even begin. So that's an ongoing voids process. We have also non-operational voids, which are our longer term voids, which are usually rural cottages, where some kind of an appraisal is carried out, and usually it's more cost effective perhaps to sell in the open market because there's too much repairs required, too many aspects to be improved, and a lot of them would be deemed to be unfit. So the operational voids are ongoing, and continually allocations are being made, and continually those are being repaired and let as soon as possible.
Yeah, just really to add what we're saying as well. One of the things we've found in recent years is a trend where we're doing pure allocations. So that means our tenants are staying longer in our houses, which means there's less available stock, which puts another pressure on. And you're right to say about the pressure in terms of temporary accommodation. And that's one of the kind of the signs that there are trends in terms of homelessness, people not getting the right accommodation. So I think, there's a couple of things that we are very keen to do, work with housing associations and the council, especially to try and get houses there to make, we're really there to make the case for houses and more housing and more social housing, and also even to develop our own programme. We would be very much keen to start to build again. Now that could be a few years off, but we would like to be putting more houses, especially in the estates where we own already, because we feel that we could reinforce the work that the housing associations are doing. But we are working with housing associations, and sometimes it takes a number of years to get sites up and running. But we take on board what they're saying, and the figures are there. They're showing the trends. So we need to make the case for more investment.
Okay. Is that everyone who wishes to come? I don't know if you want to come back on that. You're more than welcome, but
I wouldn't mind. Thank you, Chair. I don't know if my internet's okay. I actually think the responses are very exactly what you expect. Really, it's an accurate representation of the situation. I do think it needs to be recognised, though, by everybody that, and I know that the housing executive that are here recognise it, that there's a chronic crisis in housing in Enniskillen, and it needs to go back to those powers that be up in Stormont who are underfunding the capital budget for new houses. This is a particular problem here. We've got a major growing gap throughout the council area, actually, but it's specifically extremely bad in Enniskillen, and we need to see how we can take forward a programme of building. And I just want to lift the final point, which is was made by Jonathan there, around the need for the housing executive itself to take forward building. And I think that that's a key objective, because housing executive houses are, as far as I'm concerned, the best option usually for tenants. I personally believe that the move to outsource this to the housing associations has been one which has been fraught and has been led for political reasons rather than the benefit of the tenants. And I think the housing executive is best placed to take forward these projects, but they need to get adequate funding to do so. And one last question, perhaps, is it possible for the housing executive to identify sites in the council in the Enniskillen area that might be, we could progress that as a council? Thank you, Chair.
Well, in fairness, no, I'm gonna bring you at the end on that one. I'm sort of conscious that there's a large number of speakers here, so hold that question. If there's time at the end, I'll let you back in. But I'm gonna move now to Councillor Deehan.
Thank you, Chair. And can I add my word of thanks to Paul and his team for from NIHE for coming this evening and presenting your report. I'm encouraged to hear that NIHE are thinking of taking on building responsibilities in what would be the 50th anniversary of their foundation. And I'm inclined to agree with Councillor O'Coffey in relation to the positive role that NIHE can have in provision of social and social housing. And I also feel that adequate funding needs to be made available to address this as a matter of urgency. Now, just before this meeting, we did have an informal presentation from the PPR project. And amongst other things, they highlighted the delays, the inordinate delays in getting projects to fruition. Now, in relation to the Omagh district electoral area, which I represent, there still is a significant unmet need in the housing sector. Now, admittedly, it is less than Enniskillen, but as Mona has pointed out, it's still an increase of 47 on the previous year. Now, I do welcome all the projects that have come to fruition. The completed projects in Woodside Avenue and Pinefield Avenue. But my impression is that the rate at which these projects are being delivered on the ground is not sufficient even to keep up with demand. And I think that that needs to be recognised and it needs to be addressed urgently. And in particular, as Mona has stated in her presentation, that so much of the housing need is accounted for by single people, older people and small households. And for many years, the many years that I have been a councillor, every time NIHE have presented to us, this fact is presented, but in my opinion, steps are not being taken to address the real need for housing for elderly people and single people, particularly those people with disabilities and mental health problems. So I suppose I have two questions, Chair, if I may. First of all, what can be done to accelerate the pace of development and in particular to ensure that the adequate amount of funding is being made available? And secondly, what is being done in terms of the provision for older people and for single people, particularly those with disabilities, including mental health problems? Thank you, Chair.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, well, I think the issue is obviously in respect of the new build, and I know Johnny and Mona can come on to this, but there are timescales, leading times, there has been delays. Sometimes they are outside of our control, and obviously the housing associations are working with the local councils in respect to planning and building control. However, there is a timescale that sometimes they do take a time, which is sometimes out of the control of the housing executive itself. Mona, do you want to just come in on the older people and the second part of the question?
Yes, thank you, Councillor, for your question. Yes, we do recognise that there's a particular well, a number of the proposals that we're getting in at the minute for Omagh would be sites that have existing planning approval on them. So there are sites that are for larger properties. And unfortunately, it's very difficult to turn the planning approval around. Ideally, what is required is a site that we can determine the housing mix for the scheme. Now, currently a housing association has made a bid for the former technical cottage site. And within the housing mix of that scheme, we are recommending the inclusion of single accommodation, some older person accommodation, as well as family houses. Our hands are really tied until the housing association is able to acquire the site and bring it through for planning. Unfortunately, we don't have land bank within Omagh town. Now, we are carrying out a site investigation study of looking at sites within the development limit to see if there are any remaining sites. As through community planning, the Housing Executive is sharing our lands that's in our ownership right throughout not only the main towns but also throughout rural areas with the council and all the other community planning partners. And we would welcome through community planning that statute partners would share their lands as well, in the hope that maybe we will get a site through and a housing association can work to acquire that site and develop the housing mix that's most suitable to meet the needs of the people on the waiting list. This has happened in other council areas, within another council areas through the community planning process. Surplus public sector sites have been made available to housing associations who are progressing schemes. And it can happen here if the statutory partners would all share their lands, and hopefully a housing association can pick up on one of those.
Yeah, just to echo that has worked, especially in the Newry Down area over the last 2 or 3 years, where the programme has really ratcheted up. So, you know, that's something that we're looking at, and it's maybe something we could sit down with councillors and explain how that process worked in the future, but it's certainly proved fruit. Now, land availability is always going to be a big issue, and you know, and getting the mix as well in terms of the planning. But land is the big issue. But you know, I think you'd all agree that it's good to get a mix within a site. You don't just want one group of housing for, you know, all families or all elderly or all singles. You want to try and get that mix as well. So we're always trying to push to get that as well. And especially, you're right in terms of you know, people with physical needs and support is always important. We're finding more and more that we're requiring houses like that. So you know, it's important that we get those into the programme. We're always pushing those for the housing associations as well.
Okay. Councillor, are you content with that, or?
Yeah, yes, Chair. Well, thank you for that. And, you know, I do want to acknowledge the work of the Housing Executive, and in particular, the support that Una McElvinney has been to me personally over many years. But look, I would just say that Fermanagh and Omagh District Council recognise the importance of good housing in terms of quality of life and safety. And as a member of the Planning Committee, Chair, I would not like to think that we would be tardy in getting planning applications come to assessment as soon as possible. I want to see this process speeded up, because at the rate we're going in terms of acquiring land, getting planning approval, getting funding, getting contractors on site, it's just not keeping up with demand. And we're going to be in serious difficulties unless we can find a way around this. Thanks, Chair.
Okay, thank you very much. Councillor Michael Duff.
Thank you, Chair, and have to say, agree with the content and tone of perhaps both spoken contributions so far from Councillors O'Coffey and Deehan. Thought they were very good. At the outset, can I say thanks as well to Una McElvinney and to Ignatius Maguire and Edith Bell, the housing officers, maintenance people and patch managers that I and my colleague Councillor Anne-Marie Fitzgerald in Omagh Town have been working with a lot in recent months. I'd like to thank them all for their professionalism and help. Absolutely agree with the need to perhaps accelerate a new build programme in Omagh, and that's the DEA I represent, so I'm going to emphasise it. Serious need, significant need, 113 identified over the next 5 years. And again, this thing about singles and older people needing to be close to the town centre. And again, you know, I would hate to think that the community planning process and planning procedures are frustrating this work in some way. So certainly after this meeting, I'll want to explore both of those things. But my questions then, moving on from that statement, would be earlier this evening, that PPR meeting, I would like maybe the team, Paul, through Paul or whomever, to address what is the Housing Executive's community involvement strategy. You know, we're all in favour of participatory democracy and working with communities and community groups, and supporting communities seems to play a role in that. Dara and Oma does a lot of work, Dara O'Neill. But what is the community involvement strategy? Also, if I could get comments on the disabled facilities grant situation at this time, and something on affordable warmth and cavity wall and window replacement, that type of insulation measure. So there's probably 3 themes in there of questions, but initial comments don't need answers. Thank you.
Johnny, do you want to take the part on the community involvement in the local area?
Well, we have, I suppose, the kind of the statutory part of that is where we're working with yourselves through the community planning. But I think one of our strengths has been that work, as you rightly mentioned, through the Support in Communities NI. And I think I have to say, over the last 6 months, that has really proved very, very useful, not only for our tenants, but the wider community. And I know that we offered funding, I think, to around about 6 projects to help people through the COVID, but it was the COVID period. But I think it shows you that an organisation like ourselves can only get results if we're working hand in hand with the community. There's no point in not consulting with them, not working with them. So, you know, I know Una and the local team would meet with them regularly, and I would meet then with the whole of the South region on a regular basis. But, you know, we need to, I think this last 6 months has also shown that we're missing the face-to-face part of it, engaging with people on that kind of, through meetings and through different engagements. We've been working very well through Zoom and other things, but I think that's an issue we're going to have to really look at. How proactive can we get digitally with them and keep on going? Because when we were talking to them, they were saying about issues in neighbourhoods and estate inspections and all those type of things. So yeah, it's vitally important. And as I say, through the statutory, is that kind of then planning, the kind of more strategic side of things, planning, making sure that we're taking community needs into account. So hopefully that answers that bit of it. I have to say now, in terms of the grant side of things, I maybe need to get back to you on that, Councillor, about some of the issues. So.
Sorry, can I just interject, Johnny? On page 57 of the Housing Investment Plan, it actually sets out the disabled facilities grants and the spend. So really over the past year, 91 disabled facilities grants were completed at an approval value of 973,000. So there's some information, Councillor, within the Housing Investment Plan on that if you want to have a wee scan through.
Just maybe a quick question on that would be, how cumbersome or easy is the process? Does an application have to go to a panel in Belfast, whereas it used to be signed off locally by a senior officer? You know, is it the case now that it's the exception rather than the rule that gets through and it's decided upon by a panel in Belfast, which to me seems very inaccessible? Thank you.
No problem at all. We will check that on the process and detail that for you. We'll send that in the reply to the council.
Thank you. Thank you.
All right.
Sorry, we have Councillor Stephen Donnelly next.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you very much for that presentation. It was very useful, and I think that it probably does, as others have alluded to, it does underline that there are going to be significant challenges with respect to sort of the housing demand that exists across our district, and in particular in my own district electoral area of Oma. I suppose I would just touch on 3 or 4 kind of primary questions. As the report alludes to, the demand has increased right across the district, rural or urban, and indeed that applies to housing stress. But particular acute pressures exist in both Enniskillen and Omagh. The report also alludes to the challenges that are going to be presented by demographic changes over the next 10 years. And I'm just curious as to whether, as in the case with respect to housing demand, those pressures are also concentrated within those two urban DEAs, or is it something that's much more consistent and evenly spread across the district, or are those challenges going to be particularly felt by Enniskillen and Omagh? And linked to that, I appreciate that there were certain descriptions given earlier with respect to the profile of the demand that exists for housing in Enniskillen. And I'm curious, is there any idea as to what the typical profile is for housing demand in Omagh in terms of whether it's primarily single person households or if it's a bit more broad than that? Secondly, earlier this month, I believe, the council had an engagement with Fermanagh Women's Aid with respect to issues around domestic violence. And I know that in the report it says that just under 10% of those who present for homelessness do so as a result of reasons to do with domestic violence. And I'm just curious, is that in terms of the future housing investment plan, how does that figure kind of inform the work that needs to happen in terms of making accommodation available? Because I know that there are significant concerns about the inappropriateness and the supply of housing for those who do find themselves in vulnerable situations of domestic violence, particularly here in Fermanagh and Omagh, but indeed across the wider West. And the third and final question that I would just pose is that the report also makes reference to work that is ongoing with respect to an Irish travellers accommodation strategy. And this links into wider issues around making sure that minorities have access to housing in our district in Ireland. And I appreciate that be finalised yet in terms of the details, and that might not be the case until the end of the year. But is there any preliminary thoughts at this stage as to what kind of interventions we may need to make sure that those who are part of that minority community are able to access the housing that they are in need of? Thank you very much.
Mona?
Yes, I'll just pick up on the first 2 points, Councillor, that you raised. And really it's the demand, if the demand in the main towns, if that filters through to the rural areas, and yes, we would find that at the minute we're doing a series of rural needs tests throughout a number of the rural locations, and we would find if respondents who reply are from right across all of the household categories. So yes, that would certainly be the case. And indeed in some rural areas would be more a need for singles accommodation, or in other cases older person accommodation. Also the profile of households in Omagh, our latest stats would suggest about 50% of the level in housing stress would be for single person applicants, which would be very similar to Enniskillen town as well, which is high. We do appreciate that a lot of the former housing executive stock, our stock, would be more of 3-bed accommodation. So that's really why the imbalance. We would like to see housing associations develop more smaller unit accommodation to try and address that need. Maybe Una, do you want to pick up on the query regarding domestic violence?
Well, we have had no real contact with Women's Aid recently, but they are a supported accommodation, so they do get funding through our supporting accommodation project in Belfast. But we have no further plans at the moment for further developments. Women's Aid themselves would have to identify a development. Now, we did work with them in the past when they were trying to purchase various developments in the town, but none of those ever came to fruition. But they haven't approached us locally about anything recently, unless they have gone through our supporting people department in Belfast. But we're not aware locally of anything recently.
In terms of the travellers, then we have every 5-6 years we look at a travellers accommodation need. So that one was finalised just last year, which we're really just it's really like a survey of traveller groups and individuals to see what the needs are. So we're just finalising that at the moment. I don't have any specific details, but I suppose it's about identifying land that's available for sites for more permanent housing as well. So once that, I think it might be out for consultation at the moment. So we'll certainly be sharing that with local councils as we go along.
Well, thank you very much for those responses. And I suppose the comment I would just make is that 50% figure for single person household demand within the Omagh area. I suppose that in some ways underscores the fact that very much the big challenge that's going to exist over the next 10 years is going to be particularly with respect to young people, people under 35 who are going to be facing particular challenges when it comes to access and housing. So that's a big challenge that we're going to have to undertake. But thank you very much for your time.
Okay, and just if you've already spoken, you please remember to take your hand down. I think the next hand that hasn't spoken yet is Councillor Swift.
Thank you, Cahirlock, and I thank all the housing personnel this evening with the report, and all of which is clearly presented visually and factually for our information. So I appreciate that, easy to read and easy to understand, and albeit of course unfortunate, a lot of the facts and the statistics held within, given the gaps that we can clearly see. And without a doubt, investment is the big thing. I don't really have many questions left. They've already been answered, but I was going to ask two pertinent ones now that are still outstanding. And it has already been raised by, I think, all of the councillors that have talked so far. The vulnerable women and the domestic violence cases. And we had the workshop a few weeks ago. And it was stated at that workshop about the need for emergency housing and it not being readily available and appropriate was one of the words that I heard coming out loudly and clearly. So given the response from the team here this evening that they haven't been made aware, Chris, I would suggest that we now as a council write back to the contacts and say that we have raised the matter on their behalf tonight and that they need to engage. We have raised it certainly, and we have asked that the case is made that availability is ready and appropriate for the people who are in need, those vulnerable cases, because what we heard on the night was very stark. So I propose that the council write back to them, making sure that we have that they are aware we've raised the case and the personnel are just waiting to hear from them. And they haven't heard from them on the need, so that's come across clearly here this evening. I'm definitely supportive of the grassroots informing the need, and interestingly, many years ago when I started off as a councillor, the latent demands were the thing that were presented to us, you know, is there a need in your area? And maybe at the time, there may not have been a need, and lo and behold, then 6 months later, a need arises. So, you know, I would always be impressing the flexibility that would be needed in the case of providing social housing for the vulnerable in our area. Again, it's investment that's needed. There doesn't seem to be any new money coming forward. And I too am damning on the Stormont regime that hasn't really stepped up and helped. With a previous presentation that we heard before this meeting from PPM, okay, they have presented some imaginative ways forward for their area. Ours is very different. We're so much more rural and everything else, and it can be easier to get things done in an urban setting. So we have other issues to deal with. So I would just ask the question then, how can all that be changed? And I know Mona has outlined a lot of some of the responses, but with regard the bureaucracy, are you managing to lobby successfully at all on any level with ministers or MLAs who, you know, can be in a position to support the investment that's needed for your area? And obviously, we as councillors, perhaps can you suggest, is there anything more that we can do to assist with that. And obviously, I'm sure there are areas that we can assist with that. And as I said, Ian, it definitely needs to be a more joint up approach. And I'm hearing there are possible gaps between some of the different departments and silos and stakeholders involved, you know, so of course we understand that that can be a difficulty. But if you can just perhaps advise how that can be changed, because obviously going forward that will be a massive step and a massive help. And I just finish by saying, if you can pass on to all of your colleagues who always provide me with a very swift response when I have any questions on the heating and affordable heating for people, and again, the lining of their houses and all of that. So thank all the team for an agate.
Okay.
You'll probably need a seconder for my proposal too, Chris. Stephen wanted to do that.
I'm sure it'll come in. There's a number of speakers here. I'm pretty sure it'll come in some kind of through all the speakers that are coming on later. But if it isn't, we'll call for it.
Okay. Johnny, do you want to pick up on any of those points?
Well, I think the certainly you know, corporately we do make the case for housing, and you know, budgets are set. I think the housing associations would argue that it's frustrating sometimes that it's on an annual basis, because it takes 2 or 3 years to get the schemes up and running. So, but you know, we use that the waiting list figures that you see presented this evening to make the case for investment, and I think that is quite stark. I think a lot of it is to do with the capacity in terms of the construction industry to deliver in terms of new build as well, and land availability. But I think certainly, you know, when we work together with the housing associations and other people, we can deliver a lot quicker. So you know, that is very important. I think the case that we've been really making over the last 5 years is actually investment in housing executive stock as well. We have many of our houses are we're saying about the housing executives 50 years old. We inherited quite a lot of stock from old corporations and councils. We stopped building in the mid 1990s, so we have an aging stock that needs an awful lot of investment. So that really has been where our drive has been in terms of making the case, and we will continue to do that. We need a long-term investment in our own stock, because what we're going to find in the years to come, that some of it will not be fit to be lived in unless it's got substantial money. So, you know, that has been one of our main focus in recent years.
Okay. Any further comments on that point?
No, that's all satisfactory. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Next, I have Councillor John Coyle.
Thank you, Chair. No, just obviously the housing stress. We need to invest in more social housing. I don't think that Stormont, some ministers don't want to deliver, you know, social housing and affordable housing in our. It's going to be bad, like, so I think we will try and keep the pressure on to get achievement, and I thank the housing for commitment, you know, in bringing projects forward, and hopefully that they will be funded. I have an issue, housing stock, especially in Éire North. A number of them still don't have double glazed PVC windows. Some have wooden, you know, frames. I have raised it a number of times over this last year to 18 months with no avail. And I was wondering, is that going to be addressed this time? Obviously, I have worked with residents, and I thank Ignatius and all the team as well, but there's antisocial behaviour going on in a number of villages that I cover in Éire North, and it needs to be addressed. I'm waiting on Patch Manager to get back to me, but I haven't got that. I don't know if Una could maybe forward or give me an update on some of the queries that I have, but I thank the Northern Ireland Housing Executive for their presentation.
Councillor Coyle, we are aware of the issue with the double glazing and the timber frame windows. And as you know, we have sent maintenance officers out in the past to inspect the condition of them and to carry out holding repairs. The windows themselves have been identified for an upgrade to PVC. But in the last year or so, there have been various procurement issues which we had to work through in terms of some of our contracts, and then we were further delayed by COVID. So we are working through these, but there is a delay and there is a backlog in terms of schemes, but we are aware of them and working through them. If there are still specific issues with any of the windows and you want to report them to me this evening after the meeting, or send me an email, we will get the maintenance officers to inspect them again. In relation to the antisocial behaviour, yes, we are aware of it, and our team, the team leader and the patch manager are working towards a resolution, but there is a process to be followed. There are diaries to be completed, evidence to be collated, and we have to interview both parties at the moment by phone mainly because we're not doing internal visits. And then if we have enough information, as you probably are aware, we then have to go to our community safety team. If as a last resort, the only way of resolving it is by way of legal action. But before we get anywhere near that, we have to make sure we have all the evidence, all the diaries completed, and offer mediation before we get anywhere near that. So we are aware of those issues and we are trying to resolve them. But I can ask the patch manager to make contact with you if you would like me to do that.
Yes, please, Una, that'll be appreciated. And thanks.
Okay.
No, it's just I have elderly constituents. And they were promised, for a number of years ago, and I have given it, but I would like just to keep it at the forefront of your mind. And I would like to, I'll second Bernice's proposal as well, Chair, just for the completeness. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Just through the chair on that one, just to bring the members up to date as well, is we're looking to go to procurement on Thursday for a £500 million contract, excuse me, for all of the areas over 7 years. And this will bring in doors, windows, kitchen, bathrooms and rewires. So we're hoping to get that through procurement in January to commence probably middle of next year. And if we can get that in place, we'll have the continuity of contracts going forward.
Okay. John, I'm assuming that's a satisfactory response. I'm gonna move on to Councillor Thompson.
Thank you very much, Chairman. First of all, can I thank Paul and the team there this evening from the Northern Ireland Housing Executive. A lot of the questions, comments have already been made, so I'm not going to go too much of this. I suppose as an Omagh Town Councillor like yourself, Chairman, I do have some concerns with regard to the housing need. 113 there was reflected upon. I welcome the comments by Jonathan, I think it was earlier on, about the taking on building responsibilities over the next few years. Maybe if you could elaborate on that, Jonathan, and maybe give me some sort of a timeline on that one. Also, I welcome social development, social housing developments on the Woodside Avenue and Pinefield Avenue in Omagh. And I know this is in conjunction with the housing associations, which are doing a good job there as well. Can I also take this opportunity to thank Una McAvinnie, Edith Bell, and the full team of the Northern Ireland Housing Executive locally for all their assistance over this period of time. I suppose the other issue I do have, and that is interagency meetings. And I know we're in a COVID-19 situation at this minute in time, but interagency meetings and walkabouts, sometimes there don't be personnel on those. And as maybe if we move on, come out of those, the situation that we're in now at the minute, I would like to see more representation from the Northern Ireland Housing Executive on those meetings and also on the walkabouts. That's something for the future, obviously. So, Jonathan, if you can come back on that, thank you, Chair.
Well, certainly, certainly in terms of the walkabouts and the state inspections and things like that, and working together, I think it's important. So, I'm sure Una and her team will be more welcome to do those. And I think it's something that we noticed when the COVID first struck and we were closing down things, is that agency thing, I think, drifted away a little bit, and I think we all need all the agencies need a bit more proactive in trying to get together. So certainly something that we're picking up on now. Actually, Paul might be better to talk about the new bill, because he's been dealing with some of the work with the department really on that.
Yeah, thanks, Johnny. As members will probably be aware, and Johnny alluded to it earlier in the conversation, that since the mid-90s, a policy decision was taken that the housing associations would undertake the new build because of the funding that they could bring in. My team obviously look after the asset management side, and one of the issues for us is obviously the condition of the stock and how much is too much on investment, because at some point properties do become at an age where it's not feasible to invest. And my team are actually just putting business cases together on a couple of projects looking at the new build provision, but ultimately they have to go through the through DFC and Department of Finance as well, because there still is that policy decision there around the investment and the match funding through the housing associations. But we are putting a number of cases together. We've had some very positive feedback on the first one, and we've just resubmitted the information that was requested on that. So fingers crossed, we are pushing for it. The chair is pushing for it. And again, like yourselves, I would like us to be back involved at some point in time, sooner rather than later.
Okay, thank you, Chairman, and thank you to the team. It's obviously hard to beat the face-to-face, but I know we're some time off that, but thank you again for being here. Thank you.
Yeah. Now, as Councillor Swift's proposal has been proposed and saying, I think I'll just take it to a vote now. If anyone has any objections to Councillor Swift's proposal, please indicate now, just verbally. If not, then we can.
Chair, if I could just recap, that's the proposal that we request NIHE to liaise and collaborate with Women's Aid to provide the necessary support for cases of domestic aid. Domestic violence.
Okay. Anyone wish to object to that? No. Okay, well, that's passed.
Sorry, Chris, I understood what Bernice said was that it was also we were to write to them and say we'd raised it, and they were to contact the housing executive with their needs, Women's Aid.
Yes, Chair, that I've confirmed with that we would request the housing executive in writing to liaise and collaborate with Women's Aid and provide the necessary support for any cases of domestic violence.
Well, sorry, I understood it was that we were to write back to Women's Aid that we had raised it on their behalf, and they were to get in touch with the housing executive
We'll advise
to address their needs.
We can do that as well.
Yeah, I think that's how I certainly interpreted it. But no, I think that's scrambled. I don't think anyone's objecting to it, so it'll be passed. The next one that I have who hasn't spoke yet, and once again, if you've already spoken, will you please take your hand down. Councillor Keenan.
Thank you, Chairman, and thanks for the presentation. Everyone there. One thing I think the presentation has shown us is that I think some previous members have said it, that outsourcing to the housing associations has been a failure. It does not seem to have been delivered on the basis of need. And we look at the figures presented to us, it'll see this, its programmes failed miserably. But I do welcome the fact that the Housing Executive is now thinking of building again. I think that this needs to get the full support from Stormont, as everyone here has mentioned. And I think also that any available land that is unused and owned by the council should be made available where possible to make this happen. And as I say, from listening to the broad spectrum of political representatives here, and the fact that we all seem to be in the agreement that it should be the Housing Executive building the houses, that they should be funded accordingly. This shows that the political will is there, and we know that the need is there. So I think it's imperative that this happens. And I'd like to raise a proposal that as a council we write to the DFC and request proper funding, proper and adequate funding should be made to make this happen. And as Barry says as well, like we spoke with PPR there a couple of hours ago, and they do have a great scope on participation with the community, which does give a very good idea of the need. And I think a working partnership with them would also be very beneficial.
So I am before you turn your microphone off there. So just so I am clear, write to the DFC requesting that they fund it adequately, and
adequate funding to enable the House Executive to go ahead with purchasing and building the homes needed, as stated in the report.
Have you got that yet? Yep. Okay.
And
I don't know. I don't think you're on yet. One wee second, Amy. Just you don't think? I think you're still muted.
Hello.
Oh wait, just 1 second.
Just to recap then, Councillor Keenan, the proposal is that the Council would write to the Department for Communities requesting that proper and adequate funding is provided to the Northern Ireland Housing Executive to support capital investment in housing and direct capital investment in housing stock.
Happy with that?
To meet the required needs. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. I'm sure that can be. Yeah, okay. that can be accommodated. Okay, you sorry, I cut you off there. You were saying.
The other thing, I have been contacted by some members of a local residents committee in Thrath.
Well, just I'll be honest with you, Councillor Kane, and this is entirely up to you. You can go on if you want, but sometimes it's not good to go into specifics. I mean, these are you know what I mean. So I'll leave it up to you, but I would steer away from specifics. I'm sure you can speak to officers of the NIHE in a more personal capacity. But I'll leave it up to you. We'll go on ahead.
No, you're correct. So with that sort of thing, I was just wondering who the correct contact would be to within your department.
Paul, Gina B.
Probably the best person to probably write to would be Paul Price, the head of Director of Housing from DFC.
Paul Price.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
If it's not necessarily him, he will direct it to the area that it would need to go to.
All right, thank you.
Okay. All right, thank you, Councillor Keenan. I suppose I have Kim. Would you like to come at this stage, maybe?
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to just comment in terms of welcome the partnership working through the partnership board, and just to note that the ongoing work that we've been doing in terms of our evidence base and engagement has identified housing stress as a local issue in terms of the community plan, and we have agreed an action which is led by the Housing Executive to work in partnership to prevent homelessness, and that action has been led by Alva Hickey, who's currently working with our officers and partners, including Women's Aid, to identify the scope of that action and how it will be taken forward. And just to say that we will continue to work with the Housing Executive through community planning and through our local development plan team to review and discuss the availability of land for housing locally. Thank you.
No, thanks for that. Thanks for that, Kim. Next indication is for Councillor McAleer.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, there's a lot to cover. I think I would be fully supportive, and glad to see that Bernice's proposal has passed now, given that, as been noted, page 57 notes there's only 4 units assigned for vulnerable women in the Fermanagh Enniskillen district. And I suppose leading on from that presentation where we were told that the accommodation currently available for Women's Aid was completely unsuitable, in that it wasn't a ground floor accommodation, so it wasn't suitable to people with mobility issues, and the fact even that meant that people who were vulnerable and who were calling out for help could have been just sort of left because of that impediment straight off. I think it is, looking through the figures, I have great sympathy for the Housing Executive and what you're working at, because really it's quite overwhelming, the figures that we're getting across the board, and I suppose on breakdown then amongst our local district area. The trends are quite worrying. I suppose that the housing executive did have over 13,000 tenants claiming universal credit in March 2020, and I suppose, as is noted in the report, that by early 2021 it's estimated that it'll be up to 45,000. You know, the fact that you're going to have increase in housing claims and housing benefit. You have from your stats there, page 21, the fact that repossessions are on the up, that waiting lists are on the up, that you know, it's all quite worrying. I suppose my question, or one of my questions, would be on page 26. You've listed the number of applicants, people who are in housing stress, and the allocations over the previous 4-year period. I'm wondering, in terms of the total number of applicants, and indeed the total number of people in housing stress over that period, are there any people that are still on that list or have been on that list for a period of 3 or 4 years? That would be the first question that I would like to ask. In terms of the 5-year assessment, 2019 to 24, like we have identified and shown that there is a need for 334 units in the district. As Councillor Coffey's are highlighted already, we have 12 units planned this current year. It doesn't sound sufficient. So I suppose, again, the call has to go out to Stormont and to the relevant departments that money is needed, and again, political will is needed. It's great to see the harmony in council tonight, but I think the threat or the danger is that the further up the chain you go, and if there are private landlords sitting in some of these higher echelons of government, maybe they're not quite as inclined to progress or to work towards the provision of social and sheltered accommodation. In relation to the March 2019 to March 2020 figures of 669 homeless on page 30, I'm wondering, does that include people who are currently either in sheltered accommodation, people who are sofa surfing, maybe people who are registered or who would identify as being homeless, but maybe at present have a roof over their head, albeit short term? I welcome that there's an increase on page 31 of wheelchair units, provision of wheelchair units. And again, there's identified, or it was touched on by Councillor Keane, the housing executive, as noted on page 31, has a responsibility for identifying and meeting the accommodation needs of Irish travellers. Again, I would just have a follow on from that. There's a mention of the Irish Travellers Accommodation Strategy from 2020 to 2025, and it states that that's currently being finalised. I suppose my concern there is it's currently September 2020, and I'm wondering, is there any indication maybe when that might be finalised? Page 33, you recognise the local development plan, but I think possibly the less said about that maybe at this stage, the better. And page 48, in terms of outcome number 3, and this is an issue in particular that's been raised with me within the past year and again within the past week, there's a note about working with partner organisations and communities to tackle antisocial behaviour, create safer places to live. Now, I've been in contact with the local department in relation to a park in Greencastle, in Maryville in Greencastle, and also Shandon Park in Omagh, where this seems to be an ongoing issue. And again, maybe you're not in a place during this meeting to speak on local issues or specific instances, but I think it would be a very useful, a very worthwhile idea to implement that cooperation, that cross-organisation or cross-departmental working. I think if you're dealing with people maybe who are suffering from mental illness or who are suffering something like these kind of, if people who are suffering from mental illness and are being rehoused or rehomed in the community, it's vitally important that they're assessed and by medical professionals, and that's okay to do so, but also that support is being provided either by the NHS, by PH, whoever it might be, that they have sufficient resource and support when they're in the community, that they're not feeling isolated or feeling on their own, and they're not really left to their own devices. And similarly, in terms of antisocial behaviour, I think it's vitally important that the Department of Health or possibly the police are involved where there are issues of ongoing antisocial behaviour. I know your report states about these people. Unfortunately, given circumstances in my local DEA, I would have little faith in them, but possibly that would be another avenue that could be addressed just in terms of relating and working with these other bodies that could possibly help facilitate or help ease accommodation of people who are vulnerable and who are at risk back into the community. And finally, just under outcome 4 on page 51, a note that you've highlighted an increase of rent collection to reinvest and improve services. So I'm hoping that that's just successfully lifting or collecting rent as opposed to physically increasing the rent. But if you could maybe come back on a couple of those issues, I'd appreciate it. Thank you.
Una, do you want to pick up on the waiting times?
Well, sorry, did you say Una, Paul? I can't hear too well.
Sorry, yeah, Una, yes, yeah. There's a number of those for you.
Yes, in relation to your question, Councillor, about are some of the people in housing stress still on the list from 4 or 5 years ago, I couldn't specifically say that, but what I can say is that housing stress is anybody who's 30 points or more, and that while points vary from allocation to allocation, we would be allocating mainly in most areas where there's demand, anything from 120 to 180 points. So it's quite likely that if someone's in housing stress and has around 30 points, 40 points, 50 points, they could be on the list for a considerable length of time. So it's not impossible that they could be on the list for 3 to 4 years.
Yeah, it's something that we can maybe get about average waiting times and things like that anyway, but it could be a number of years. You also mentioned about the homelessness. The vast majority of people who are on our waiting list there as homeless are people who present to us who are usually in accommodation. It's one of the biggest reasons that the accommodation is not suitable for their needs, or that there's family breakup. So it's very, very rare that it's mainly in the large cities where we have people who are out on the streets and are in temporary hostels. But so when they're on the waiting list as homeless, they meet the statutory criteria, and one of them would be that accommodation is not suitable. But there'd be very few of them that wouldn't have a roof over their head. And we are also responsible for getting them emergency temporary accommodation if they do find themselves in that situation. You're saying about the travellers, that travellers document is out for consultation. So I would say that will be launched quite soon. So it should be within 2020. And you mentioned antisocial behaviour as well. I was just looking at one case there in another area. It does take a long time to get some of these issues sorted out, and it's sometimes not a matter just for us. We need to work with others as well. But you need a burden of proof in this and getting evidence. And I know it's frustrating for staff in Una's office and the tenants as well. But we need to have a lot of evidence before we can move people on or evict people. So we do that, but with those cases, I suppose you're working with the local office anyway, and we'll try to get that as moving as fast as we can. I think that was more. Any other specific issues there?
No, well, I suppose just in relation to the specifically the homeless issue. First off, one of the constituents who contacted me was actually living in his car, and he had been in touch with the local housing executive, but unfortunately his points situation wasn't really sufficient to grant him emergency accommodation. And then when he did eventually meet the quota or meet the threshold, it was accommodation in Derry that he was advised to go to, which wasn't suitable in terms of his base being in Omagh and even transport to and from the location. And there was a whole list of factors really why it didn't suit. So unfortunately, it just wasn't really a suitable outcome whatsoever. And I think that just reinforces the need for local provision and local accommodation here. And sorry, just Chair, I didn't get a chance, but I was going to second Councillor Keenan's proposal there whenever I came in as well. I'd just like to do that as well.
Sorry, I'm on mute. No, that's grand. I'd say if you have any more questions, Emmett, I'm sort of going to put you to the bottom because there's still a few number of speakers who haven't spoken yet. But if there's time at the end, we'll bring you back in. The next person I have indicating is Councillor Thornton.
Thank you, Chair. First of all, I want to personally thank the team there. I know through Una that the speedy response that we've received as elected representative is fantastic. So I thank the team for their continued work. Obviously, the pandemic is causing great issues of delay amongst government departments and, in fact, local authorities and so on. But one issue that's been raised to me recently is the backlog on grants and the time delay from the application right through to the site visit or inspection. Now, I've been recently informed that in one case, they've been told that it may be not to March next year that they get an inspection. I'm just wondering what sort of backlog there is and what, in fact, you're trying to do to reduce that backlog. That's my question.
I think on that, go on, Johnny, did you want to pick up on that? Or I was just going to say, generally, with it being specific, it would probably be better if we came back with an answer to you rather than answer it at this meeting.
Okay, well, I mean, I'm just wondering, well, what is the backlog? I mean, is there a substantive backlog which would cause such a thing? I mean, that's a general question.
Not that we're specifically aware of. I know we lost a lot of months there really about getting inspections in, but you know, our staff were really up and working across all our different services. You know, Una's responsible for the landlord side of things in terms of our housing stock, and in terms of the grants, I know there has been a delay in getting out into people's properties, and sometimes with the grants you're dealing with maybe people who have vulnerabilities anyway, and maybe we're self-isolating. So I'm not specifically aware of that backlog, but that would have been one of the reasons. But I know that the grant staff were still been working as our housing side of things. So I'll maybe chase up with that over the next couple of days and get back to you if there is a specific issue.
That's great, and I'll forward through constituents' name. Paul there individually. Thank you.
Super. Yeah.
Sorry, Councillor O'Reilly.
Thank you, Chair. First of all, I just want to thank Una and the team and yourselves for coming down and giving us, or rather giving us the presentation. I think it's important that as a council, we get these opportunities on a regular basis to be able to raise some of the issues. But I think as well as all of that, I think it's important that when we raise the issues, that something tries to be done about it, because we have been here and raised a lot of these issues before. I suppose one of the first ones I want to raise is going back to the whole demand need testing, and to say that an ad that generally goes into the paper is less than effective, I would say, in establishing an interest pool from people about the demand testing. And hopefully this time around to try to, and being forced by the COVID pandemic to use more social media and etc., trying to get into the actual local community organizations to promote the latent demand, hopefully will garner a better response to be able to demonstrate that much needed demand in local villages and areas that to this point hasn't ever been able to muster that demand to get the new builds started in their areas. And can I say that we see by the figures there that flats are not something that is ever sort of looked at or built to cater for single people needing housing. Unfortunately, we see a lot of houses being allocated to single people where they could be available to families if we had these single unit availabilities. We have properties above shops and so forth lying empty in a lot of our towns and villages, and our centre of our towns and villages dying on their feet. And I think there is an abundance of properties there that could possibly be looked at, as well as new build to bring life back into town centres. I think that would help in a lot of respects. We are still in 2021 looking at new build houses with heating systems, oil-fired heating systems and so forth. Is there and can there be a push towards passive new builds and even retrofits to try and reduce those heating costs for the most vulnerable? And I'm sure we all agree that due to the numbers rising and COVID, there will be an awful lot more people struggling to be able to pay rents and do all of the rest of it there with the whole benefit systems being under an awful lot of stress. While I want to pay compliment to the maintenance people that try to look after all the various issues throughout the length and breadth of our council district, can I say that the system seems to be clogged somewhere along the way in being able to allocate out contracts to the contractors to be able to get timely responses to different issues. We have had situations where contractors have pulled out of things, contracts have to be completely reworked and put out again, and literally years go by before things can actually get onto the ground. So I don't know how that can be taken up, and I have spoke to Mr. McQuillan on this to try and see if there's some way to do that. Can I also pay compliment to Una and working with the PCSP on a lot of crime preventative opportunities and initiatives, and I think that has to be stated here, that there is a lot of work goes on there behind the scenes that probably people are not aware of, and the work that Una does night after night coming out to those meetings certainly makes a difference. Can I make the proposal, Chair, that the Housing Executive need to be making an emergency approach to the Assembly, to the Minister, to look at emergency legislation to allow them to rapidly build or purchase new properties because our stock is so depleted, and with and we see from the figures with the number of houses sold and so forth, which is great to see that people were able to get that opportunity for affordable homes and be able to buy them. But we need to replace, and we're not able to do it through the normal systems. And we certainly have numbers rising exponentially here with COVID, and I think that over the next number of years we will see that to our cost. And unless there is an emergency build program, not alone for the people who find themselves in housing need, but also for the economy locally to be able to jumpstart that in the future. And if we don't act now, Chair, we are going to be so far behind that we are going to be overwhelmed by an awful lot of people being in dire straits. And my last point, Chair, is the antisocial and the whole problems that go on from time to time between neighbours. We don't seem to have, from a housing executive point of view, teams to be able to go out and actually, out of hours, track that evidence base. And you say quite rightly, you need the evidence to be able to take forward the case. But there isn't anybody, to my knowledge, on the different times over the years that are able to sit from 7 o'clock in the evening through till 5 o'clock the next morning on a consistent basis to be able to gather that evidence, whether it's neighbours against neighbours or dogs or whatever the thing is. It is very hard to build that evidence if you haven't the personnel able to get on the ground to be able to do that. And the last point is the replacement grant. That's my understanding, I stand to be corrected, around the 25k mark. And certainly I had issues where contractors didn't want to and didn't find it competitive to be able to go in and do work on houses that was badly needed for that sort of price. So, and I appreciate budgets are budgets and pressure is still there, but certainly there needs to be a look at those ceilings to allow much needed work to be done to some homes and allow the contractors to actually say, well, we can take that work on for that sort of price. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, there's quite a few points to raise there. I suppose just before I ask you to answer, there's a couple of things just from a housekeeping point of view. Just for the minutes, there's a phone number there that's ending in 12. Is that Councillor Green?
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
It's Councillor Clark, and I was looking to come in somewhere in this.
Well, do you know what? I'll bring you in. Well, that's just for the minutes, but I will bring you in after they get to respond to Thomas. How about that?
Okay, Chair, there was a number of things there. Mona, if you just want to pick up the issue on the latent demand and the flats for singles, I'll take up the retrofit, the maintenance contracts and the building and the replacement grant. And I think Johnny or Una could probably pick up on the OSP. Okay?
Yes, that's fine. Thank you, Councillor, for your question. Yes, we've now moved towards a social media form of rural needs tests, and actually we're seeing some good benefits out of it, particularly over the past year or so. Really, since 2002, we've carried out 26 tests right across Fermanagh and Omagh Councillorry, and we have a number of repeat tests. More recently, we retested Dromore. It was tested last October, and it was very much carried out by social media. Okay, we put ads in the papers and that as well, but it was mostly by social media. And we've actually noticed a bit of an increase in the waiting list for Dromore, so we're having a look at that with a view to increasing the need in that location. We also completed a test in Gortin, and that was carried out along with the Rural Housing Association. Again, the waiting list for Gortin has increased as a result of the test. A test in Donagh has recently completed now. The local office staff are working through the list. There were 17 respondents to the test now, and they'll be assessed now to see how many meet the housing stress threshold onto the waiting list. We had hoped to carry out a test in Drumquin during the past year. It was delayed, however, we're due to commence that test this week, and again, it will be via social media. So if anyone wishes to encourage people to come onto the waiting list or acknowledge the test in Drumquin, we'd really appreciate that. And we're also due to carry out a rural needs test in Brookborough over the coming year. So yes, just to reiterate, social media definitely has increased the impact of the tests, which is really good to see, because it's good to try and build up the waiting lists in our rural areas. In terms of flats, within housing mixes of schemes, if a housing association comes through with a proposal, we would actually include within the housing mix apartments, 1 and 2 bedroom apartments, to meet the needs of smaller unit accommodation. We also welcome insertion of generic wheelchair accommodation in terms of apartments as well. So we would prefer to go down that line rather than to be allocating houses to singles or smaller households. So yes, I would certainly agree with that.
Okay, just on the issue as regards to new build retrofit then. There is a provision for a multiplier within the TCI rate, and it only covers about 1/3 of the cost to bring it up. So obviously there is a significant cost to the housing associations in delivering that. Obviously, if that cost, there's an increased cost to them from getting their match funding and also the cost for the grants as well. In respect of our own retrofit programme, as some of the councillors may be aware, there is now the carbon zero agenda to bring all social housing up to carbon zero by 2050. The Housing Executive is currently looking at the options available to it to retrofit its stock. We're already starting to undertake some retrofitting of external wall insulation. However, the issue in a Northern Ireland context is not similar to the rest of GB, where we don't have a proprietary electrical tariff like an Economy 10. We only have peak electric and an Economy 7 tariff. So for us to be able to move to some more of the passive nature, we would need an alternative electrical tariff, which we are talking to the regulator at this moment in time. We're looking at bringing an energy strategy forward in the next probably 12 months as regards to how we would move forward with that. And that doesn't just include retrofitting insulation, it covers the whole house fabric as well. Maintenance contracts themselves, as I said to members last year, we've had a number of legal challenges in the past, and that automatically stops us in our tracks, and we can't re-let them until those legal challenges have been removed, and that can take anything up to 12 to 24 months. As I did allude to earlier, the Housing Executive is going to market for its major planned maintenance programme this week, and hopefully in place by possibly, it's going to board in January and possibly in place by mid-year. If that gets up and running, we won't have the need to go out to tender. The contracts will be in place and we'll be able to give 3 to 5 year programmes going forward and what's going on. The Build Again issue, in respect of that, again, I did state earlier within the meeting that at the minute there isn't the provision for us to build. We are working with the department on putting business cases forward, and we're working to look at alternatives, and the member did raise the issue about purchasing properties that are currently for sale, and we also have a business case similar along those lines to go to the department to supplement that provision. Replacement grant, as the elected member knows, that is the condition of the grant system at this moment in time. We can come back and actually to you and advise whether that is going to be reviewed, but ultimately that at this moment in time is the upper ceiling that is available. Okay, is there anything that we missed on that, Councillor O'Reilly?
No, in actual fact, you're one of the few that actually can take all questions and answer them appropriately. Thank you very much. That's very good. And just to make the point, I appreciate there is constraints there, but I think it's incumbent on me to keep raising these issues any opportunity, and certainly emphasise the good team that's locally on Daruna.
Okay. Well, look, just as we're moving on, we have a proposal on the table here from Councillor Keenan, seconded by Councillor Michael Lear. I wonder if Celine would be able to summarise it before we put to a vote, and then we can sort of put that one to one side, and then we'll also have an unseconded proposal by Councillor O'Reilly, but with Councillor Clark coming in next, perhaps he would be prepared to second it. But just let's hear the first proposal first.
So The proposal from Councillor Keenan, seconded by Councillor McAleer, was that the Council writes to the Department for Communities to request that proper and adequate funding is provided to the Northern Ireland Housing Executive to support direct capital investment in housing stock to meet identified needs.
That already been voted on.
Sorry? I think we'd agreed on that one. Yes, we had. Yeah. So
I think we had.
Yeah,
No, I think we have agreed on it.
Apologies. Yes. We
Okay. So if we move now to Councillor Clark, you were looking on the phone.
Yeah. Can I second Councillor O'Reilly's? Do you want to put that to the floor first?
Aye, well, that's all right. If we put that proposal to the
clarify that
floor.
one.
Yeah.
There. Proposed by Councillor O'Reilly and then seconded by Councillor Clark that the Council requests that the Housing Executive approaches the Northern Ireland Assembly to seek emergency legislation in the context of the COVID-19 pandemic to allow them to urgently progress with the building and purchase of additional housing stock to meet current and future needs. Just ask Councillor O'Reilly to confirm that that reflects his proposal.
Councillor O'Reilly.
Yes, thanks, Kim. That's the proposal.
Celine, but that's all right. Look,
Chair, can I have that read out again, please?
Yep.
That the Council requests that the Northern Ireland Housing Executive approaches the Northern Ireland Assembly to seek emergency legislation in the context of the COVID-19 pandemic to allow them to urgently progress with the building and purchase of additional housing stock to meet current and future needs.
Okay.
Chair, can I make an amendment to that?
Well, it would be up to Councillor O'Reilly to accept it, but you can certainly make an amendment if you wish. Donal?
Yeah, I think it's necessary to add the fact that there needs to be additional investment made by Stormont. So it's not just a simple case of getting problems. It's austerity budgets that's coming out of Stormont is the problem here. So I would like to propose that the amendment be amended to include a request for adequate funds to be provided by Stormont. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor O'Reilly, it's up to yourself whether you accept that or not. Hello?
Yeah, I'm thinking as I'm pausing here. Yeah, it's kind of explicit in itself that for it to be able to be achieved needs that extra funded. But yes, I'm happy to add that specifically into the proposal, Chair.
Okay. That's 100. Right, if we put that to the floor now, if anyone wishes to vote against it, please indicate now. Verbally. No. Okay, we'll take that as agreed. Right, Councillor Clark.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I have two issues. One is around the issue of this antisocial behaviour, and particularly in Greencastle. I'm not going to be specific about it, but
please don't.
I'm slightly disappointed that I think it picked up there that they're now. I was told last week that they were going to do home visits again, but that obviously has changed. Obviously, circumstances have changed, so that's a disappointment. On the other thing is, I was involved in the rural housing needs assessment in Gortin, and I think somebody has mentioned it there. But I suppose I'm more interested, what's the next steps now? Where does this go now? So that's really two simple questions. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, well, two questions. I'm sure you can sort of take them in turn.
Johnny?
Yeah, well, in terms of ASB, I think during that early stage of lockdown was, we weren't able to get out and about, but, all our offices were open. We were taking ASB cases as best we could. Now all our the two offices in the area are open. We have staff in on a rota basis. We're able to get out and about, and we're looking at getting into properties as well. But I think that shouldn't stop us doing the antisocial behaviour cases and talking to people. We can still do that either by appointment through the office or going out round houses. But it's a difficult time to get into people's properties for any length of time. But we are going out and about, and especially if meetings and things like that are out on site, we are able to do that.
perhaps, and I'm not looking to put words in Councillor Clark's mouth, but maybe you could clarify with him sort of after the meeting exactly sort of what the specifics are around that case. I think you said it was it Gortin or Greencastle, was it, or
Greencastle.
Yeah.
Well, maybe you could sort of
Yeah.
thrash that one out, the specifics after the meeting. Maybe that'd be all right, Councillor Clark.
Yeah.
Grand. There was a second one, I think, as well.
Was it about rural housing? Was that?
Was it rural?
Yeah,
I was about, go ahead, sir.
Gortin has been assessed, and where does it go now? Where does the process go? I'm trying to figure out.
Okay, if you like, I'll just come back on that, Councillor Clark. Yes, the rural needs test in Gortin has complete, and need has been identified for a small scheme in the Gortin area. We're just finalising the figures at the minute. Once we finalise the figures, which will be done over the next few weeks, we will be producing a commissioning prospectus, and what it is a document that sets out our unmet need to housing associations, for housing associations to go and have a look to try and identify whether it's a site or existing properties or off-the-shelf properties within the area for acquisition. So that would be the next step. Also, what we intend to do in Gortin as well is to carry out a site investigation study ourselves, just to have a look if there is any remaining lands within the settlement limit, and if we identify any sites, we'll be passing those to housing association as well. As I said, it is a small need that has been it has come out following the rural needs test, which is encouraging, but it is something that we will certainly be focusing on.
Okay, Councillor Clark, are you happy with that response?
Oh yeah, thank you, Chair.
Okay. Well, as far as I can see, everyone who has spoken at least everyone who's indicating to speak has spoken at least once. So I think I'd like to ask a question now. I'm not sure who it's directed at. However, when I look at some of the reasons for homelessness, one of the reasons is accommodation not reasonable. I suppose, and I don't want to go into specifics, but I've had an example recently in my own case where I'm not content that, and I suppose as one of the mental health champions for the council, I suppose this is particularly pertinent, but I'm not content that mental health is appropriately appreciated in that sort of accommodation not reasonable type approach. Just because a property is physically fit for an individual does not mean that it's necessarily fit, and there are scenarios, once again, we're not going into specific, but there are scenarios where mental health difficulties may render an accommodation not reasonable. I suppose, would you maybe just give a wee bit of sort of background as to what weight you give to mental health difficulties, and how those are sort of captured in both the homelessness and the points system, please?
Una, would you be okay to deal with that?
In terms of homelessness, accommodation not reasonable would possibly focus to a major extent on physical attributes, but certainly mental health conditions are taken into account, and I know housing advisors actually are responsible for making their own decisions, but in terms of mental health, they do seek reports from the experts, as it were, in terms of social services and possibly other agencies that are engaging with the applicants. And certainly I know, for example, where we have some people who suffer from claustrophobia, for example, which is possibly one of the milder mental health issues compared to some of the more severe ones, and other issues where maybe they find the accommodation for some reason isn't suitable from a mental health perspective, that is taken into account, and that people have been awarded priority need in terms of their mental health. But it's very much down to engaging with the support agencies and getting reports from them, which we normally do without any much bother, but it is taken into account. It's not as clear as physical attributes where, for example, somebody can't climb steps or can't climb stairs or can't get in and out of a bath, but they are certainly taken into account. But they are, I do agree, they're more specific and need more focus, but we do certainly take those conditions into account.
Just in a similar vein to, I think it was another individual, and I can't remember which councillor it was, but who would be a sort of who would be maybe an individual to contact about specifics in that sort of general context? If I understand there's a meeting about it tomorrow, but who would be an appropriate person to maybe
Well,
for a second opinion?
What do you mean a second opinion?
Well, if I would still be uncontent that that mental health difficulties weren't properly accounted for, and I say I don't want to go into specific, but they are. Is there any sort of appeal mechanism or?
Well, sometimes what happens is, for example, you can contact me directly either by email or by phone, because I do get queries like that where maybe, you feel that a certain weight hasn't been given to an application and we can ask them to review it. Now, in some cases, the review could be to the applicant's advantage in that perhaps sometimes you have to interview an applicant 3 or 4 times to get the full picture, and you may get additional information which is to their advantage. But in some cases, the decision does remain unchanged because it is the housing advisor's responsibility. It is their decision. And while I can make sure that they have looked at all and explored all options and make sure that they have done that, I can't unduly influence their decision because they have to stand over. But in most cases, certainly, you can come to me and we can make sure that all avenues have been looked at and that all information has been researched to the nth degree to make sure that nothing has gone awry.
Okay, no, that's very much appreciated. You may be hearing from me later. Now, I did say that anyone who wanted to come in at the end, we have a wee bit of time left. I've got 2 hands up. I don't know if they're in error or not. Councillor Keenan and Councillor Deehan, and Councillor McElduff. Now, I'm going to try and ask that sort of second speeches are sort of much more contained than the first. So please be very pointed and direct in your comments. Councillor Deehan, are you looking in again?
Yes, thank you, Chair. I had actually, Chair, wanted to come in much earlier to suggest an amendment to Councillor O'Reilly's proposal. But since that proposal has already passed, I'll make this a separate proposal. Councillor O'Reilly referred specifically to the need for passive housing. Given that benefits are under stress, that there's a high level of fuel poverty in our district council region, and I was glad that Paul had clarified the work that the NIHE is currently undertaking, looking at opportunities to retrofit, and mindful of the carbon zero agenda. I was going to propose an amendment to Councillor O'Reilly's proposal, but I would propose, Chair, that we would write to the the Northern Ireland Executive, asking them to advance the carbon zero agenda by making appropriate financial resources available to progress passive housing, given the level of fuel poverty, and also to provide funding to NIHE to advance their retrofitting schedule. Thank you, Chair.
Yeah, I saw a number of hands indicate there. I suppose, and perhaps, well, the next hand that was up was Councillor McElduff. So we'll let him come first, and then we'll see where things stand.
Okay, Chair, I just wanted to propose that there be a further note for the councillors, for council, for perhaps the November RNC meeting on some of those issues that were flagged up tonight regarding planning, regarding community planning, and I think we should add in then opportunity sites in Omagh to allow a future capital building programme of housing to take place. I think there is almost no excuse bar investment from government, in terms of finance. But I believe the sites are there. And in the course of the meeting, I kind of was alarmed that there was suggestions that community planning and planning procedures were frustrating the identification of suitable sites for housing development in Omagh. Now that would apply to Enniskillen, I'm sure, as well. But I'm kind of keeping my eye out for Oma here because I believe the sites are available and there shouldn't take too much work to identify the suitability. Thank you, Chair. Just want to make that proposal. And that could be the November RNC meeting. I'm not pressurising it.
Well, Councillor Michael, why not just say at the earliest opportunity, and that gives a wee bit of flexibility. Would that be all right?
Exactly. Thanks, Chris. Thanks, Chair.
Right, that'll do. So we've got 2 unseconded proposals on the table. Councillor McCaffrey.
Gurmagat, Caherly, well, I would like to echo the sentiments that have been expressed by the previous speakers, and I would be happy to second both of the motions, both of the proposals that have been put forward. And just thanks again to the Housing Executive staff that are here with us this evening. Thanks for the time and the presentation. Gurmagat.
Okay, that's right to the point. Right, so we have 2 proposals here. So if you wish to clarify them before they
Chair,
go to a
just to
vote.
clarify with Councillor Deehan, writing to the Northern Ireland Executive, possibly that would be to the Department of Finance or indeed to Department for Community, which would be the sponsoring body for the Housing Executive, or indeed both, I suppose.
Chair.
Yeah, go on ahead.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Chair. Yes, absolutely. I made my proposal to the Northern Ireland Executive because this is an overarching strategy which would apply overall. But certainly, yes, we can be specific about the Department for Communities and the Department of Finance, Chair. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, William. Sorry.
So that's just then to confirm to write to the Department for Communities and Department of Finance, requesting them to provide funding to the Northern Ireland Housing Executive to support passive house capital development and retrofit investment to meet the carbon zero agenda.
Okay, so we'll take that one first then. Anyone who wishes to vote against, please indicate now, verbally.
I think, yeah, do we take Councillor McCaffrey, who general support as seconding, or?
No, I think as far as I picked up, he actually said he was seconding both.
Okay. Yep.
So anyone who wishes to vote against, please indicate now. Nope. Okay. The second one then.
And the second one then is a proposal of Councillor Michael Duff, again seconded by Councillor McCaffrey, that there would be a paper to a future Regeneration and Community Committee meeting at the earliest opportunity, identifying planning and opportunity sites in the Oma area for consideration for further social housing development.
Okay. Anyone who wishes to vote against, please indicate now.
Chair, it was also identifying that references were made tonight to planning procedures and also community planning, that they were frustrating, the identification of these sites. So that I want an update on that as well. And even reference was made to other councils like Newry and Mourne, where they were making more progress in a community plan sense. So it sounded critical to me. So I'm injecting a bit of urgency into it as well. Thank you.
Just through the chair, before we take that one forward as a formal proposal, if I could just clarify with our representatives from the Housing Executive that was the inference that planning procedures and community planning processes were currently a barrier to development.
Sorry, I think from a planning point of view, is all areas are slightly different, and some are speedy, some take the time, and I don't think it's a one size fits all on that. But again, any support from the councils to expedite timescales in which they've got receipt of the applications would muchly be appreciated.
Oh well, I'm sure we can find some form of words that would encapsulate. Are you content, Councillor Michael Duff, that the officers sort of can properly reflect what you're wishing?
Yeah, exactly. I'm happy that the paper will be comprehensive and address all those issues. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Michael Duff. Final indication I have is from Councillor O'Coffey. Feel free to. Nope. Okay. Well, I'm out of indications then, and as a result, I'd like to thank 4 representatives from the Northern Ireland Housing Executive for their comprehensive report, and wish you all a very nice what's left of your evening. Thanks a million, and will you look after yourselves? Take care now.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Bye bye.
Bye bye.